Hi, I'm Greta, and this is my channel, Gretel Crumbs. And today's video is titled Living in the Horror, a Mercy Review, Episode 1, Review and Analysis. Well, would you like to listen to a podcast that's not only gay, but features cryptids and is set in Western time? So think like gay cowboys. Gay. And again, they're gay. So that sold me, and I was able to get at least like one other friend hooked on the podcast. And big fan of gay rights. Yeah. No, but really, I love celebrating good queer content. I think we need to be doing more of that. So this is part of my effort to not only rant about something that I enjoy, but potentially get other people interested in it. So first of all, our podcast, the tagline is a Queer Eldritch Western. Our two voice actors, main leads of the show. We have Dr. Daisy Gray, played by Aurora Avery L., Wayne Sawyer, played by Austin Sharp, and these two kill it with these characters. Austin Sharp does an amazing job of really hitting this grizzly voice. And Daisy Gray is the perfect overexcited, academic, neurodivergent, nerdy type person. She is clearly very excitable, maybe a bit self-absorbed, but she's really into cryptology, has a PhD in the field of study, and the two bounce off of each other in a great way. Spoilers ahead for the plot of episode 1. You know, you can't just rant about something for like an hour or forever. Like, eventually, you just are like, oh, this is something I enjoy. Well, this is my solution to that. I made a video. And we're gonna dive straight into the plot. Here we are. So it opens to Wayne Sawyer being tied. He's hung, or he's like hanging from something, and a crow is pecking at him, tearing off his flesh. Like, it's gross, and it's described. We hear the visuals of that happening. And spoiler for the next slide, we'll see what this actually is, but there's more to what is happening than meets the eye. Because Wayne's tied up, he's bleeding, and a crow is pecking at him. It's dismal, it's gray, it's rainy. We hear the creaking. It's like, it's not a pleasant place to be in. Well, enter scene Daisy Gray. So she almost crashes her wagon. That's how she's introduced. So already just a wave of chaos. Almost doesn't even see Sawyer to begin with, and sees what's going on with the trap, and it is immediately, goes into, or almost goes into, rescuing him. They have a bit of back and forth, but she does free him from the trap, and we discovered that this was not what Wayne Sawyer had in mind. And why is that the case? Well, because it was a trap. So, and what was it a trap for? Good question. So I took this image from Canva. Well, not took, I made it. It's because believe it or not, it's hard to find a picture of a swarm of laughing jellyfish with tentacles that like rip people apart. Had a hard time finding that. So that kind of paints a picture. The monster enters the scene, and the two have to get out of there. They have to escape. Some, commotion and scuffling happens, but the two do manage to escape. Sawyer's injured, but they've escaped. And this is the creature. Dr. Daisy Gray names it Letitia Medusa, which is just a fun name. That's it. It's scary. Like, it is a scary creature. It is portrayed as pretty much just very powerful. It kills an absurd amount of people, and we'll see that soon. They barely escape. They make a deal. Dr. Daisy Gray wants to help him hunt and kill this monster. She wants to like finish it out, and then he can take her to Mercy because he's going there anyways. So he's very reluctant. Uh, does not want to take the deal, but agrees to because she has saved his life a couple of times in the ensuing chaos after, he was hanging, and then the hanging itself. Because he was being hung. That's not, not the best. Now, they're making their way to Mercy, and they come across a small farming community called Bliss. And they discovered that a crowd has formed near a corpse. The corpse is fresh, drained dry, eyes burst, and they jump to some conclusions. We hear, oh, it's a witch that did this, a vampire, and they're blaming the widow of the man that died, Abigail. Now, they're listening to this, our two leads, and they decide to do something because they don't want to see a mob just kill an innocent woman. They go to her house and kind of explain what's going on, like, hey, a mob is coming after you. And then she tells a story about what actually happened to her husband and based on the things that she describes, it sounds extremely likely that this Letitia Medusa is, of course, the true culprit. But the mob was too fast. They're right outside the door. Like, things aren't looking good. But cue another creature on the scene. So the mob is pounding on the door. Sawyer wants to open the door, and Daisy says no. So the three of them, Abigail, Sawyer, and Daisy Gray, are sitting in silence once the creature comes onto the scene and starts killing people. We figure out that Sawyer's blood, his injury, is what attracted the monsters. And we also discovered that it sounds like Daisy Gray took advantage of that, which is a little concerning. She was willing to kind of use him as a tag-along trap, but I'm not entirely sure on that point myself. I'm not sure if it just happens and she points out the convenience of it, or if that was a subconscious or real thought that she had. But either way, once the killing starts, Sawyer really wants to let the mob in. Daisy manages to talk him out of it because, hey, we're all gonna die if you do that. But it is a significant moral dilemma. So all three stay inside. They're drinking whiskey until it's over, until the killing and carnage is done. And once it is done, they open the door and all they see is like ash everywhere. So we come to discover, obviously pretty quickly, that the ash is what is left of the people, which is terrifying because that means somehow the creatures were able to burn them alive or somehow turn them into ash. So there's a lot we don't see, but with what is actually happening with the monster, which is a very interesting thing of doing, like, show don't tell. At this point, they're not showing, and they're just giving us little bits, which really creates that tense, that discomfort that you just feel because something terrible is happening, and you're hearing all of these gory sound effects. It just creates a great atmosphere for that scene and really sets the tone. Like, whew. That mob scene is something else. And connecting all of this to a bigger topic. Shocker. I'm a huge horror fan. I love books, series, movies. There's certain horror stuff I'm not a huge fan of, but I love the genre as a whole. And this particular podcast and podcasts in general just have this ability to make the horror so much more immediate. Like, it is happening right now to these characters. We're hearing their actual reactions instead of, a story that's been told after the fact. So things are in the past tense, like, oh, this happened. But when you get that immediate gut reaction to horrible things happening, whew, that is engaging as all get out, even as it can be kind of scary and a little overwhelming at times. Like, it can be. But in the moment, this podcast really makes the horror feel like it's immediate. And that really captures your audience. I think this podcast does a great balancing act with all these different elements that make horror feel so much more real and grounded. I have some notes. I'm not going to read them all, but if you're a fan of like literary analysis and getting a little deeper into it, feel free to pause the more text heavy sections. But essentially, I wanted to focus on three major like sections where sound played a very key role. And for me, that's the beginning of the episode where we're having all these like dismal gray, it's raining, there's a crow, there's creaking, he's bleeding, he's dying. It's like all this stuff is happening, and it really puts you there in the scene and kind of puts you in the perspective of what Sawyer is feeling and how he is in the environment itself. We don't need a narrator. We have the dialogue that we need. And Dr. Daisy Gray, a character like her, someone that is so chaotic and just intense, using dialogue to show that is a really smart move. And they do it right away. Her very first entrance into the scene tells us everything we need to know about her. She's, again, chaotic, brilliant, a little bit self-absorbed, it sounds like. And last but not least, the mob dying. So the mob dying is a terrible scene in terms of the horror of it. We don't see what's happening. We just get these clues. We just get an idea of what the monster is capable of. And that's quite daunting. We also get a sense of how that terror is impacting Sawyer and how it impacts Daisy Gray in comparison, who seems almost excited, titillated by some of these terrible, horrifying things. Whereas Sawyer seems to have a slightly different take, maybe perhaps more personal. Perhaps we all know there's some trauma in the past. Sawyer definitely feels like a traumatized character. And we get another moment that shows that. It's not on this list, but at one point he has a flashback of a memory of someone from his youth who like had a specific relationship with him, and gives you a lot of insight into how he views himself. Spoiler, it's not super positive. He's not. The dude has some issues, but so does Daisy Gray. So what I did is I had the longer text sections, and then I broke it down, and then the next slide breaks it down the most. But I really wanted to kind of bring my point home here. This podcast shows the world through experience and not explanation. You don't need a narrator to say, this is a dark place, this is a depressing, sad place, because you're just wasting your very valuable, precious time, runtime, as a podcast, if that's what you're doing. Not that podcasts, they do have to do some of the drier stuff. They have to do some exposition. They have to do things to make sure that you are on board with the story. But you can also take advantage of the fact that this is an audio format. This podcast really trusts you to read a character through their actions and voice. It's not hand-holding. I feel like it really respects its audience. It respects its intelligence. And we're establishing tone throughout by not only what it chooses to show, but what it chooses not to show. And we've gone over this a few times, but the silence after the screaming ends, says more than any narrator can. The fact that all these people have died and it is dead silent, that's terrifying. And it's a lot of people. So much happens in this episode. We have Creature, Letitia Medusa. We have Sawyer's past, highlighted in the flashback. We have Daisy's personality, the mystery itself, the moral choice between letting the mob die or not, the swarm that is going towards Mercy after all of this happens. It never feels like too much. And I think that's because Mercy layers everything through sound and experience, not through someone explaining it to you. And because the way that it does that feels varied enough throughout the episode, it also doesn't run stale. You know, it's not just people talking. They kind of mix it up where they can to keep the episode feeling fresh throughout. I think that this podcast, again, really respects you enough to keep you along for the ride without holding your hand. And I think that's cool. So again, we're just about closing out this review. I have a few more details. I think like how I want to structure these types of reviews, depending on if I'm reviewing an episode or a season, I want to give you that info and then give you some final analysis. I'm not going to read all these notes, but if you're interested, of course you can. But essentially, my point being on this slide is that queer identity, our characters are queer, and that's something that's stated and made plain, you know. But queer identities are often portrayed as something to be feared, something dangerous, but unlike social fear, you know, fear for those identities, true evil is indiscriminate and destructive to everyone. And I don't know how intentional that was, kind of weaving that in, but I thought that was very interesting, especially having your first episode kind of finish out with that message. And last but not least, and it's funny because I'm saying this at the end of an analysis piece, but you don't need to analyze queer media, or, you know, you don't have to be someone who analyzes stuff to enjoy it. And I think that's especially important in terms of queer content, because celebrating those voices and getting those voices out there is what makes us, you know, feel alive. And that's how we share our community and stuff. So check it out. There's another last but not least, for the last time, this podcast was just an amazing listening experience, and it's actually not done. Episodes are still coming out. If I'm correct, this podcast is at its like mid-season point right now, so more episodes are coming. But in terms of real life, I'd like to end out this episode, you know, saying how this like podcast would work for some people or not work. So I would say it's perfect for chores. If you're doing activities that are a little more on the mindless side, like you're doing the same thing, you don't need to think critically about what you're doing. This is great for that, because you can just enjoy the engaging content as you're doing your chores, which makes chores go by so much faster. It's also not bad for working on projects or homework, maybe too engaging for driving. That's a bit of a toughie. I think there were definitely moments where I was like, oh, I should save this for when I get home. Like, this is not the best idea because I'm getting way too pulled by it. But anyway, that's how we're wrapping up this review of Mercy. Go check it out. I think it's a great podcast. I'm excited to see what happens next. And yeah, thanks for your time.